everyone. Welcome back. Danielle and I are here today. We're going to talk about the market and being a pro at your local market or whichever market you cover. We believe that's paramount for your success in the real estate industry. And so we're really excited to talk to you about that today.
Yes, I'm excited to dive in.
Yes.
Let's start first with, what would you define market? Like, what is market to you, right? Because I think there's a sense of, you can be hyper local, you can have multiple markets. What is our market, and how do you define market, I guess?
So I think you and I both would probably agree with this. I mean, most agents probably have a more localized market that they cover. Not necessarily, but because we're so large and we have so many agents, and over the years, our market is Houston and surrounding areas. So essentially it's a huge market, but a lot of agents maybe focus on like their suburb or their actual town and the surrounding little areas around it. So like if you were going to zone in on Katy, you would be the west side of Houston. So you would have Richmond, Sealy, Berkshire, Cypress, those kind of areas. And maybe they don't necessarily take business and go to the Woodlands or Spring. I think that's changed over the years for a lot of agents. Since I was first in the business, it seemed like we would get referrals from the Woodlands agent down to us because they had somebody more focused. And we do still have people that are on our team, right?
Yeah.
Agents that focus on that certain area. But for the most part, I think the market is where you're comfortable. What would you say? I mean,
I agree. Like, if you're new to real estate, right, you're going to have to draw, and whether it's literally on a map or in your head, where are you focused? Where are you looking to get clients? And sometimes you don't have the ability to say it's only in here. It may be where your first business comes from. But for me, primarily being with the team, it's a huge advantage because I have the knowledge of all of our team members and the history and the experience of having listings all over. I would say our market is clearly the greater Houston area, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're experts in the Woodlands, in Katy, in Houston, in Sugar Land, in all these different sub areas, but we're not the experts in San Antonio or Phoenix or Denver, you know? And so you can have expansion teams that may have things like that. But when we're talking about defining a real estate market, you really have to figure out, what are you comfortable being the local expert in? And then of course that can branch out to some other competing markets, right?
I think you make a really good point though, like for a new agent coming in and like where to start. I think they pick an area, they become familiar with those listings and plugging in and trying to find out as much information as they can. I think we'll talk about that a little bit later on like where to go and like what to have. But I think starting there, I think an agent starting out in Houston, it's really hard.
Yes.
There's so many different submarkets. Yeah.
Even in Houston, right? You have Montrose, you have the Heights, you have East End, you have Inner Loop, Outer Loop, you have Spring Branch, you have Memorial, you have all these little sub pockets. And we'll get into a little bit about why becoming a market expert is going to set you apart from the other agents.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, so speaking of like becoming the market expert, right? So we've identified our market and now we want to become an expert. How would you define when an agent is really an expert in an area?
I would say they have known the area for a bit, and maybe they didn't like live there for a long time. You don't have to necessarily live there. I think a lot of agents live in the area that they call themselves experts, but they're aware of what's going on in that area. Like they may know about local restaurants, local community events. They're aware of jobs, right? They're aware of the housing market. Like they really do know what's going on. They're aware of those communities, those different neighborhoods. I think sometimes new agents who say they're focusing on an area, they aren't really zoned in necessarily like they should. They should be aware of the neighborhoods. They should be aware of like the streets, right? And really have an idea on like what's coming.
Yes.
I think when we went to Friendswood, that was our first thing that we did was join the Chamber of Commerce. So we got connected immediately with different vendors. It's almost like your network for businesses, and went to different openings and different events. So we knew kind of what's going on. If you don't live there, you become familiar with those streets, the neighborhoods, the restaurants. A lot of people who are moving from a different location want to know about when's the HEB coming, when's the Target coming, stuff like that. So Chamber of Commerce, you're always involved in that, what's coming. So that's always a really good thing to do and be a part of.
And I think that there's that side of it. And then there's also just the raw data, right? So it's being like in it, right? It's being a part of the community. It's understanding what's attracting buyers there, what's attracting migration there, what amenities, access to things, right? Location. It's all of those things. But then it's also, inventory on hand, right? What is the inventory on hand in the area? What is the cycle right now? Is it a seller's market? It is a buyer's market, right? I think it's looking at what types of jobs are bringing the local people to that area. So I think you have to have a good common balance of, what are buyers desiring and what are people who are living in that area loving about that area? Why are they staying? Who is in the area? But I also think from a listing perspective, right, you really do need to look at the raw data as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important. One thing that we did leave off that I want to mention too is the schools.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's a lot of people, coming. I feel like Houston, we have really good education, and public schools are a big draw too. So being aware of those schools, and that's part of the data driven, right?
Yeah.
So you'll be able to see that, and we can talk about that. I think so what would you say? An agent who's wanting to dive in to the data, where would they go? What would you suggest?
First things first, I think your MLS is going to be the best place to start. There's so many different ways that we train our agents on how to look at data for an area. And not just that data or that area, the competing areas. So you know how to sell against and for that area, right? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? So I would say MLS is going to be a huge place to start. NAR is also a great place. I understand it's national, but you want to become an expert. You're going to have your hands in two different pots. You're going to need to have a sense and a grasp of what is going on economically at a national level, because ultimately it will affect states, regulations, governmental types of things, but MLS for your local types markets. So I would say that. A lot of other great resources that are out there that our team has. We have access to different podcasts, resources, websites where we get updates on interest rates. I think having a good understanding of that as well. I always like to look at the absorption rate through the MLS as well to kind of figure out days on market for the area. So those would be a couple of things and resources that I would do to start looking at the market overall.
One of the things that I think is actually, to piggyback on that you hear clients ask about, like buyers and sellers, is exactly what you said, the absorption rate, like days on market, how quick what's the inventory in Houston? That was a big question during COVID, right? And then we got into the rates. What are the rates at now? Those questions seem to be very much questions that people ask if they know you're a realtor, whether they're buying or just wanting to chat with you.
Yeah.
They're going to ask that. I think having a real good touch on it is definitely important. You can have a broad sense of it, of course, but definitely knowing, especially when you're going on appointments, what the average days on market are across the city, but also in that neighborhood is certainly important.
A couple other things I'll speak to before we move on that our team provides agents that I find helpful is access to just kind of what's happening with job markets, right? So we know we get a lot of data since we have a large team and a leadership team that's dedicated to helping us be the most educated and experts out there. They help us understand, like when Exxon was moving here and the Woodlands, we got an overwhelming response of buyers from out of state, from, Exxon Mobil coming up into that in between kind of Spring, Woodlands, Conroe area. So I also think that's key. And then depending on the marketplace, I know on the outskirts of the Houston greater area that we service, there's a lot going on with new construction that is not out there. That is not just privy to where you can go to one website, because how many builders do we have here in the Houston area? So it's hard to give somebody just a concrete answer of like, here are all the places you can just go and read and just check. I'm an expert now, right? That's not going to happen.
No.
But with the right connections and being plugged into a team like the Franklin team, I find that a really great place of just like, we get all the information from multiple sources, but overall it's just educating yourself and being out there and getting around people that know that area to, learn from. So Sarah, let's talk about the big, hairy, scary interest rates conversation. Why should we discuss it and have interest in interest rates? And how do you believe interest rates impact the real estate market?
As of recently, it's kind of not been as big of a deal. I think the consumer have realized that like the rates are what they're at. They're not a crazy high, but they're also not crazy low. I think most real estate professionals would agree with me that they were low for a very long time. So this argument that, they're so high, relatively speaking, they're not really that high. I think we spoke on it is a huge part, right? Because it's what you're paying for the loan, and that impacts people being able to qualify for a home, how much spending power they can have. So it's definitely a huge impact. I think if you're always waiting, like you're a buyer and the interest rates are a question, right? Like always waiting until the rate comes to a certain amount or the price. And I think that we may be talking about this later, but or you're waiting for the market, the prices to go down. Like you're going to be waiting for a really long
100%.
time and you're missing out on equity, essentially, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And again, realtors need to be educated on interest rates, because if that is an objection for a client, there are solutions for that, right? I had a really great buyer's agent do their due diligence on one of my listings and call me because they saw that it was a FHA loan. So they wanted to know was it an assumable loan, and we executed a deal. And it's a little bit longer of a process, but now their buyer, whereas the interest rates today are in the sixes, right? They're assuming a loan at a 4.275, right? And so it's a significant impact on what that buyer could put down and what they can afford and what their monthly mortgage payments are going to be. So a lot of builders offer incentives on interest rates. So there are ways around the interest rate, but I do think it's important for realtors to understand how to calculate. There's a lot of agents that when they get licensed, right, real estate school does not teach you the financing. And by no means am I suggesting you need to go out and be a loan officer and learn all those details, but I think it is important to educate the client and say, hey, Sarah, what are you looking to pay monthly, right? Let's work these numbers because here are interest rates. And yes, there's 15-year conforming. There's different ways you can work that interest rate down. But at the end of the day, showing your clients homes that they can't afford is not necessarily being an expert for your client.
It's not productive. Yeah. And I think, yes, definitely knowing it. And you don't have to know. I mean, you have to have a really good lender partner who is creative and willing, has options and different programs to offer your clients, but being creative for your client to find the best solution for them is important, right? That's the theme for just being a realtor anyways, is doing the best for your client. So you don't have to be an expert. If they start asking questions, believe me, I'm like, hey, let me get them on the phone and let me have them ask if this is what you're trying to achieve. But yes, the interest rates play a huge, huge role. And I think being able to understand where they're at, how it works, and what can be done to, make changes if there is a huge hurdle you have to jump over for that client.
So we're going to get into kind of tips and advice for analyzing markets. And we were just talking about interest rates. And I think interest rates ultimately, regardless if it's accurate or not, there can be fear that's misleading the consumers, right? And we do, unfortunately, we are impacted by that fear or by that just weird blanketed type of advice that's going out into the consumers, kind of like the pulpit.
The media.
Right. And so that creates less of a demand, right? If interest rates are high or whatever, there's all these different things that can fluctuate our market. And so to be an expert, understanding what affects long-term and what is short-term. What is the difference, do you think, in real estate that affects us long-term and short-term? Because the market's always going to fluctuate, right? But what are some things that as experts we need to know and recognize, hey, this is probably going to be short-term and this is probably more, it could be effective long-term?
So yeah, I mean, I think that's something that we both can talk about. So based on my experience, I've seen it to where, COVID
Yes.
was the first time we've ever had anything. So we did not know, honestly, we were so, what is happening? And I think none of us expected it to happen and change the way it did. So it does matter.
I remember being like, oh, this is just a few months. Like,
Yeah.
we'll be back in the office. We'll be operating as normal. And I remember that 3-month period of like, oh, we're heading into the 6th month and like, we're doing virtual everything. We can't get buyers in these homes. So I agree on that.
Yeah. And so there's some unprecedented things that can happen, right? Nationally or, obviously throughout the world. So that was something that, we didn't know, and we navigated, we educated ourselves just like everybody else kind of did, but try to make pivots when things are happening. But I think for the actual, and what happened at that point during COVID is the immediate change in interest rates that
Yes.
made the boom just go crazy, right? So interest rates can definitely be a short term. It depends on how you define short term and long term,
Sure.
because the rates were low for quite a bit of time. It wasn't just for a couple months. It ended up being for quite some time and got everybody spoiled. So it ended up being much longer term. But then we always see, cyclical kind of things happen, right? Like the spring market picks up and you've got the busier time of months that we know where everybody gears up for February, March, April, May kind of time frame, right? Or like the election. We had the election and it was a little different. I'll be interested to hear your opinion, but it was a little different than what has typically been in the last elections. From my experience, is typically slows down, and then after the election, right around the election, then it picks up. It took a little bit longer this time to pick up. It was like people were waiting till the inauguration, waiting till the new year, then the inauguration. And then it started to pick up, but it was dull for, 3-4 months.
Yeah.
It seemed much quieter than normal. But yes, short-term stuff. I think the economy overall and how the economy is doing and how the consumer feels about the economy is really almost a telltale sign. We can tell. We are constantly in communication with our builders and our clients and the leads that we have, and we're listening to those phone conversations. Right now, there doesn't seem to be as much concern about the interest rates, but some people are a little slow, and it seems like they're a little gun shy to really make the jump. They may not be complaining about the interest rates, but they're not necessarily really feeling as confident.
Yeah.
So I think that's another part of just being able to read and hear what people's objections are.
Yep.
Right?
I agree. As you were talking, I was thinking about in my 11 years in the market. Yes, COVID, that's a great example. But then my other example was Harvey, right? For our area, for the geography that we're in, being on the Gulf Coast. And so not everyone may be able to relate. If you're, in the Midwest, you don't have hurricanes. However, that was substantial. And I think still to this day, when people from out of state or even locally are moving, the flooding question, right? It was a short term in retrospect, right? It affected our city for a long time. It affected real estate market for about a year. But that fluctuation or that little hit in the market or that little short stint has had long-term effects. So again, just going back to being an expert in recognizing even these short-term COVID, people got spoiled on a low interest rate. And so now this mindset of 6.5% is not a low interest rate. I want a 3.5%. That is still a long-term effect on something that happened in the market back in 2020, 2021. So it's just interesting. And I love these conversations, right? Because it's all about understanding what will and won't affect us. But like you're saying, being an overcomer and kind of adapting to that fluctuating market and things that are going to happen. Like, we're going to have more hurricanes. We're going to have, well, maybe not a lot of pandemics, but we're going to have things that really unsettle the market for some time, whether it's 6 months or it's 6 years, but we're going to always have to pivot and we're always going to have to continue doing business.
And that's a good point that just made me think of something is insurance. So over the years with the hurricanes that we've had, and I mean, we had a derecho, tornado spinoffs, and another hurricane last year in 2024, insurance has been a thing. And I don't think enough people are talking about the insurance that people are now becoming unqualified to buy homes because of the interest rate. And a lot of people, I don't think a lot of realtors know that you can assume insurance policies. I sold my personal home in Galveston area, and the way I was able to purchase it, I was able to assume their insurance loan. So I was grandfathered in. And then I sold it and let the buyers assume it as well. So they're able to get these better rates. Most people don't know that. I mean, that's something that's part of hiring a professional who knows these things.
Could save you a lot of money as a buyer, right?
I mean, just for my case alone, it was a $5,000 a year savings.
Yeah. That's awesome. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. I mean, and that is long-term effects from these catastrophic events that really, play a role in the economy because of our local economy for a long, long term.
This will be a little fun. Before we wrap up, we're going to talk about some common mistakes and myths in the real estate market. And then we'll talk about some actionable steps for listeners today, what they can be doing to become the real estate experts they want. So a very common mistake, Sarah, is thinking real estate always appreciates. Let's talk about that.
Yes, so that's definitely a common question that we get. Like, I just purchased. We've been seeing that a lot lately, actually, where people purchased when the rates were before they started to really increase, and they may have purchased a couple years ago, and assume that because they bought in 2022, and they had recently sold in 2020, that there was going to be that same amount of appreciation. And unfortunately, that's not always the case.
When you're in that short time frame,
I think owning a home, it depends on how long you plan to own it, right? Like if you understand that you're just buying it and going to hold on to it for a year or two, you have to understand that there's not always going to be an appreciation, right? Like it depends on where you're buying, the location, the neighborhood, all of that stuff, right? There's a lot that goes in.
Yes.
That local economy. So yes, over time, most likely it is a very good investment. I mean, probably the best investment you can do is buying real estate, but that's a long-term investment, and I think that's something I've noticed kind of switch a little bit. It seems like our listing calls and leads lately a lot of them have been maybe 15-20% have been ones that have just recently bought. Maybe they underbought because of or overbought and needed a change because of whatever may be. And it's not necessarily a good thing for them to move, right? And that's what I like about our team is that we're going to advise you on what makes sense because we're not going to sit here and say, yes, you can sell for this amount. We don't want to waste people's time. So I think that's part of having a good realtor that's helping you buy though, is what is the goal here? Is this a 5-year home, a 10-year home?
Yes.
Obviously things change, but
because it doesn't always appreciate. So
yes.
Another mistake is timing the market perfectly. Is there such a thing?
I have a really good friend, and I'm going to send this to them because I'm going to be talking about them in this. They have been trying to time the market, or especially him.
To sell or buy?
They were trying to time it to sell.
Okay.
Now we sold it. Now they're timing it to buy. And in the area we're in, homes go usually off market, or if they go on the market, they're going to go really high. And he believes that he's waiting until the market comes down in that area. And I've been telling him for years that it is not. It's only going up. So it kind of negates what we just said, but this certain market is when people are selling off market, things are going for way over market list price and multiple offers. That's a strong market that is not going to be shifting anytime soon. Yeah. And the longer you wait, the more you're just throwing money away and into renting. So I don't think there's a way to perfectly time it. If you waited, what's that? I think there's a reel out there, like a meme that says if you had waited from when the rates if you were trying to time it perfectly, you would have waited until like 40 years to buy. I mean, it's just, it doesn't make complete sense to just time it, right? And I think most people who are in they're either getting married, they're buying, they need for more kids,
move up, move down,
move up,
there's
move
a
down,
reason.
relocation. You can't time it perfectly.
When my husband and I a couple years ago were selling, I would say it was a balanced market. And so I never felt like we lost hard on either the sell or the buy, but I never really thought that we won big. And so I always like to put this perspective out there of, I'm not saying this is always, because depending on where you're buying, when you're buying, if you're staying like in the same neighborhood like we are, it's the same market, right? So if it's a seller's market when I sell, what's great? It's great for me. But if I have to buy in that same seller's market as a buyer, it's a seller's market. And so I think it's important for agents to be able to understand that and to be transparent with their clients and help them understand, right? Let's understand the local market that you're selling in and buying in. And then are we winning and losing, or what is the goal, right? Because it's very hard to try and sell in a seller's market and buy in a buyer's market at the same time, because most people are doing that relatively pretty, like you need a roof over your head usually, unless there's situations that are.
I think that I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's explaining to the buyer or seller, because I think it gets lost on people where they say, I want, max for my house. And then they get upset because they can't get a discount on the one they're buying. And I'm like,
yes,
but you remember,
yes,
you wanted max over here. You can't get max here.
You're going to pay max over here.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times just kind of switching that around to get the buyer or seller to understand can be huge.
Yeah.
It's like when you're in an argument with your significant other and you're like, can you just look at it? Can you just look at it from my perspective?
Right.
Like put yourself in my shoes, So I think that sometimes can get lost on if buyers, they zone in on what they want to zone in on or sell.
And then a couple myths. Let's talk about this. This is always fun, I feel like. Renovations, they always increase a home's value. I think this is very much so something that takes a little bit of a time and just learning curve, right? Of what improvements do and don't and by how much. I think it's all relative to the area. Putting a pool in where every single house has a pool is not going to necessarily give you an extra $50,000 on return if it costs you $100,000. I think that if you are in an area where maybe pools aren't a thing and you put $150,000, really nice backyard pool, it may help you get a return on that, but not 100%, right? So I just think that I don't think I could speak on this my first year in, right? I think that I obviously understood the most impactful areas where renovations help sell a home, but I think there's a difference in renovations to help sell versus return. Right? I don't think you're always going to get a return. When my husband and I did a full reno on our house right now, we know what we put in. When we go to sell, we should not expect that back out of it. But I know that it's going to help command more and help sell because the kitchen was completely redone. Our office, there's different things. So talk to me about what your experience is with renovations. And
I think it also depends on the level of renovations. Like, are you just putting a coat of paint and carpet and
that's not renovations.
Yeah, right. That's like a remodel, but like upgrades. Yeah. But like a renovation is like a complete remodel, or like, are you taking it to the studs? Are you what exactly are you doing? Because a lot of times realtors need to have a full idea of what that is when they're doing comparables. So we often have clients that ask us for our opinion. Hey, does this neighborhood command this type of, and what's the timing on it? Are you planning to do it and be here for 20 years? Absolutely. Or are you trying to just put a simple upgrades in it to bring it up some, but not like a full renovation? I think that has to do with knowing that market, knowing what those comps sell for in the neighborhood.
And like you said, the updates versus the upgrades. That's huge. I find that some people, when I go on listing appointments, right, they're explaining to me and we just painted. And in my mind, I'm going, that's not an upgrade. That's not a renovation. That's just you're maintaining the home, right? It's like that script about a car, right? Like you're gonna get your car like the oil checked, right?
Right, that's expected.
That's not, you're gonna buy new tires when your tires wear off, and so the roof is 20 years old. You get a new roof, like that's not an upgrade.
Yeah.
Like that's nice for a buyer, like awesome, it's a brand new roof, but they're not gonna go, well, because you paid 20 grand for it, I'm gonna pay more for your house.
It's funny because you'll go into a listing. I remember doing this years ago, and they'd be like, "We got new ceiling fans,"
oh my
and
gosh,
I'm like,
we put them in ourselves.
Let me write that down. But
LED
really,
lights.
it's not. That's not an upgrade. And I think there's a like you said, it's a myth that people think those things because they spent money on it. That's not.
How would you tell an agent? I know how I would tell an agent that's new to, how do I get immersed in that? Like how, if I don't have, like I go on 300 listing appointments a year. So you start to learn real quick of what is and isn't. But if I'm new to the industry, where could I go as an agent to learn and educate myself on kind of high-end updates and upgrades?
I feel like touring homes, obviously, for sure. But a lot of it's common sense, to be honest. Like, do you think a ceiling fan is going to command, is a ceiling fan the same as putting in a pool in the backyard, or putting the kitchen down to the studs versus just putting some, painting the cabinets? Sure. I mean, those are two different things. So I think it's knowing older homes and going into neighborhoods with older kind of homes and seeing how much difference there can be, because there can be ones that need a complete gut, or ones that have had a little bit of lipstick, and then ones that have had the whole shebang done, and I think that's understanding and seeing the quality, because it all comes down to like the quality of those actual construction of those items, right?
Yep.
And that's what I would say.
Yeah. And I would say this could go into, actionable steps before we kind of get into that. Go walk new construction homes. Go talk to a sales rep. Start talking to them about upgrades and what things cost. Reach out to a colleague. I mean, we just are so well connected in EXP. I know for a fact that I could blink and think of 5 different people that would put time and invest time with me if I were to say, what is considered, an update or upgrades, and how much would you do for this kitchen versus this kitchen, and just have a mentor or have somebody. That's what I love about EXP and I love about our team, is that it's right at our fingertips. But I know that's a challenge and possibly not realistic for some agents. But if there's a desire, there's always a way to find out, and that's where I would start. So
absolutely. And also, one of the things I just thought of too is an appraiser. An appraiser, and going to an appraisal class or having an appraiser friend or vendor that you really seek some information from, because they will give you like, okay, because sometimes, like our example of pools, sometimes a pool is, we would talk about, like an appraiser would say, okay, a pool in this neighborhood may only give you for resale, if you have no other comps, this, but in Cinco Ranch, people are getting 100% of value. And that's what I'm seeing right now. That was years ago. That may not be the case right now, right?
It's all relative. It's crazy.
It's all relative. So knowing your market, just because you 5 years ago knew what it was, it's not the same today.
So smart.
So many agents aren't.
Okay, so let's wrap up for our listeners and, where to start if you're new. Where do new agents start researching their local market? What are the actionable things they can start doing to get immersed in the market? And I think you spoke very directly about this earlier. I think get in the market physically. I listened to a podcast you sent me from Kyle Whissel and how he started getting known 20 plus years ago. He started interviewing businesses. Now, I'm not saying and I'm not speaking on personal experience if that was successful, but getting out into where's your geographic area that you want to know, learn the schools, learn the neighborhoods, learn the inventory, days on market, what are the prices selling for, price per square foot on average, and just start there is what my recommendation would be. What about you?
Immerse yourself in that market. Like, figure out the market, immerse yourself in it. I think if you don't do that, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're really going to speak highly on the market and be a pro.
Yep.
Because like Kyle Whissel said, he did all that and people eventually called himself whatever the city was pro, because he knew all the new restaurants. He knew all the new
what people
everything
cared
coming.
About.
Yes.
And that's why we were talking earlier about knowing all of that, what the consumer is going to care about, but you also still need to know the raw data of who's coming here, what is a realistic, because what it helps you do is the competitive advantage. It allows you to not have any costly mistakes for your clients, right? If I know what a good price is for this home because I know the data, it's going to help my buyer make the right offer for this home and know when you're overpaying or when you're getting a good deal, right? But also being immersed in it allows you to speak on questions that your buyer has about the area.
Right.
And then something I was going to say is I would take a look at the other competing local areas as well, just because of my listing background. I know when I go on listing appointments, a lot of the times the sellers are wanting you to know the neighborhood and to know the market. And not all the time am I necessarily an expert in where I'm going, but when you're going to sell a property, it is very unlikely that you're getting your neighbor buying your home, right? It's going to be somebody likely that's coming from the outside, maybe from a nearby neighborhood, out of state, a different city. There's going to be somebody else unless it's a move up in the neighborhood. But my point is that you want to know what is the competing markets and how you're going to sell this home in
against the others.
Yes. And have strong marketing. So
absolutely.
I would know what is around the competition in the area as well.
Absolutely.
Obviously, we talked about how to stay informed, best websites. I have a couple mortgage sites that I recommend if anybody's interested. Comment, like, and share this podcast. Email us, reach out to us. We can give you some information. But any other news sources that you would highly recommend?
Gosh, I'm trying to
NAR, the MLS, mortgage rate,
sure.
daily news is really great. It's accurate. It is national level, what interest rates are. Partnering with a local lender to give you direction on what the market's doing in interest rates.
A lot of the local lenders have you're on their email stuff, so you're seeing the daily rates. I mean, that's amazing.
Yes.
I have a folder just for those. So if somebody asks,
I get
just
4
go right
a day.
there.
I'm like, here you go.
Yeah, exactly.
But it is good because I can go to their infographics and I screenshot it and I send it to clients.
Yeah.
So
I think keeping current matters is a good one. There's definitely some other ones. We get a lot from our brokerage, which is great. And because of how much we collaborate together, we're all kind of sharing stuff together. We're meeting together and sharing what we're seeing in the market when we mastermind, which is really cool because it's not just our interpretation of it, it's other people in our same market or area, which is really vital, I feel like.
So I travel to our location because I'm not local to the Katy area. And my husband asked me when I was taking this job years ago, about that and the distance and value. And I said, I don't ever care. When I get in a room with more than just two people that I respect in real estate that know more than I do, the drive is always worth it. And so just to echo what you're saying, I believe if you're a new agent, consider us or, somebody like-minded like us, get in the room with other people where you can grow and learn because the value, it doesn't matter how far they are, where they are. If you can get around, I can go to a meeting with team members on our team just for 1 hour and I leave going, well, I learned that today. I heard that. I scripted that. I was able to ask my question. And so I think you're exactly right. Getting in relationship with the right people is great. Okay. We're going to wrap up with the last question. If somebody is looking to buy or sell right now, what's the most important factor they should consider with the market?
I'm like, the most important. I mean, I think it's finding the right realtor that knows the area, like align with somebody who really interview these agents, interview if they know the market and they know what's going on, interest rates, they have the access to that, all of that data. Ask those questions. That's, I think, probably the most. I'm curious what you're going to say, though.
I should have said that. That was great. Mine was, a lot of times agents ask, why, Sarah? Why are you looking to sell? Or why, Sarah? Why are you looking to buy? I would like to think right now, as we kind of approach this balanced market, I'm thinking of the greater Houston area. I know of areas that are super hot, still will always be hot because of schools or location. And I know areas that are just like absolutely not, dead, right? So overall, pretty balanced. I would say, what is the goal goal time frame? Like, what is your end goal for selling, right? Not why are you doing it, but financially, what is your goal and how long are you looking for your next home, right? Like when you go to buy this home, Sarah, how long are you looking to stay in? Because I agree with you. Recently, I have found that a lot of people are selling and they just bought in the past couple of years. And financially, it's not my decision, but I want to make sure that financially they know what that impact might be, you know?
I think what you said is right, so great, because I don't think enough people ask questions. I think they don't ever ask the question.
Yeah.
And if somebody is like a consumer or a seller or a buyer is not getting questions, that would make me wonder if they have my best interest, because are they just doing this because they want, you know, a sale or something, instead of what is the end goal? Because these people that have been moving, and it seems like it's ticking up every year, you know, was there a wrong reason? Like what happened? And we're seeing that the area, or they weren't aware of this, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, because I might be buying with the price in mind. I can only afford, you know, $275,000. Okay, great, and we need a home to get into, and here's my price. Boom. But if I don't ask enough questions, and if I don't find out that we're really going to be selling this home in 2 years, I have no idea if I'm going to be upside down or not. If I don't have a significant down payment, or if I'm not paying cash for that, and so I just think it's important to, as an expert in the market, when you are handling any kind of transaction or a client, you want to really understand what is their end goal. Not just, well, I like this area. Okay, well, what's the end goal with this area? Why is this area important to you? Oh, you love the middle school. You love the extracurricular activities. Like, oh, you're connected in this church out there. Okay, awesome, long term. You know, it's just, to me, it's finding behind what that smoke screen is. So
yes, I agree.
Well, awesome conversation today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with a new episode. Don't forget to like, share, or subscribe to the Franklin Factor podcast. We'll see you next time.